Part 31. Stifled Creativity. Chapter 1. The Weight of the Empty Hand. The pressure built behind Ilara's empty hand, a phantom sensation that throbbed in time with the flickering gas lamps of her small, cramped quarters in the lower district. She sat at a scarred wooden table, her fingers curled as if still gripping the cold, intricate brass of the mountain key that now lay hidden beneath a loose floorboard. The burning passion she harbored, a feverish, intellectual hunger for the deep knowledge she had touched within the mountain monuments, was a fire she had to dampen to survive the scrutiny of the village in the eyes of her neighbors. She was merely a girl who had returned from a long, perhaps aimless trek to herself. She was a vessel for the visions of her mother and the staggering weight of a dying civilization's secrets. To her, the routine of the village was the final burden of the promised land. The elders spoke of this life as the pinnacle of safety, a peace bought by forgetting the heights of the past. But to Ilara it was a stagnation that felt like a physical weight on her shoulders. She felt a powerful desire to stand alone, back upon the high acclivity where the air was thin, the wind was sharp, and the truth was loud. Down here, the knowledge was a secret she had to carry in heavy silence, a void in her palm that screamed for the ancient machines to be awakened once more. Every time she reached for a mundane tool, a ladle, a broom, a common pen, the emptiness of her hand reminded her of the power she was forbidden to wield. She remembered the way the machines had hummed, a low-frequency vibration that seemed to align the very atoms of her being. Compared to that celestial resonance, the clatter of the village market was nothing more than static. The promised land of her ancestors was not this valley of mud and sheep, but the stars and the hidden dimensions the machines had once mapped. As she stared at her hand in the dim light, she realized the burden was not the knowledge itself, but the forced inability to use it. The creativity that pulsed through her veins was being strangled by the sheer necessity of appearing ordinary. Chapter 2. Athene's Out of Key. As the evening bells began to toll across the square, the village brass section began their nightly performance of the local anthem. It was a requirement of the state, a sonic reminder of unity. The music drifted through the thin, drafty walls of Ilara's room, but to her hypersensitive ears it was a broken theme. The somber notes were slightly out of key, a jarring dissonance that reflected the shallow, uninspired lives of those around her. The musicians played with mechanical precision but no soul, their instruments tarnished, not by age, but by a lack of purpose. To Ilara, this local music was the perfect auditory manifestation of the inner failing, of the fading dream of her society. She looked out her window at the riffraff below, men and women content with the trivialities of the market, the price of grain, and the petty gossip of the hearth. This was the harsh reflection of reality, a world that had forgotten its own majesty. She criticized them internally, a sharp and lonely bitterness rising in her throat. It wasn't that she felt superior as a person, but she felt burdened by a perspective they refused to acknowledge. They were humming a nursery rhyme, wow, sitting atop a sleeping titan that could save the world from the coming darkness. Yet they were too blind and too deaf to see the smoke rising on the horizon. The dissonance of the brass section grated against her memory of the mountain's great chord. In the monument, sound was a bridge to the past. Here, it was a wall to keep the future at bay. She watched a group of labourers laugh over a spilled flagon of ale, their joy appearing to her as a form of madness. How could they be so light when the world was so heavy? The theme of her life was no longer in harmony with the village song. She was a solo instrument, playing a complex, ancient concerto while the rest of the world played a three-note dirge. Chapter 3. The Muted Cry. She reached into the bottom of her travel-worn pack and pulled out the small, silver-valved trumpet, a relic she had salvaged during her ascent, an interface tool used to communicate with the mountain's resonators. When she pressed her lips to the cold mouthpiece, she did not play a fanfare. She played only a lonely, quiet cry. It was a sound contained, the heavy copper mute pressed firmly into the bell so as not to alert the watchman or the prying ears of the neighbors. The sound was a vibration of pure sorrow, a melody meant for the ghosts of her ancestors and for the mother whose face had flickered like a dying candle in the mountain's holographic light. Ilara focused on the necessary need to remain invisible, a task that grew more difficult with every passing hour. She knew the cost of comfort and the price of pay. To live among these people, she had to act like them, talk like them, and ignored the electric humming in her blood. But the silence she forced upon herself felt like a betrayal of her very DNA. Every day she spent in the village was a day she bartered her grand destiny for a temporary, suffocating safety. She was a master of a lost science, a conductor of ancient energies, forced to play the role of a silent girl in a play she found increasingly detestable. The muted trumpet felt like her own soul, capable of a roar that could shake the valley, yet restricted to a whisper that barely stirred the dust on her table. She thought of the price of pay, not in terms of coins, but in terms of the spirit. What did it profit her to have a roof over her head if the sky she saw through the window felt like a painted ceiling? The cry of the trumpet was the only honest thing in her life, a secret lament for a world that was dying because it was too afraid to hear the truth. Chapter 4. The Rigid Grace of Loss. The atmosphere of the city held the tension and the strain of a civilization nearing its breaking point. Though only Ilara seemed to feel the snap of the cord, the air felt thick, charged with the static of the machines she had partially awakened in the peaks. Inside her mind, she fought a quiet, exhausting battle, the heavy work of maintaining her normal life, carrying water, sorting grain, nodding to the elders, demanded a rigid grace. It was a performance of domesticity and compliance that left her spiritually hollowed by sunset. She moved through the muddy streets with the calculated elegance of a soldier in disguise, masking the fire of the ancient knowledge with a mask of practiced boredom. But as the moon rose over the jagged silhouettes of the mountains, Alara began to see the final loss of all she had thrown away to maintain this facade. She looked at her reflection in a bucket of rainwater and saw a stranger, someone whose eyes were too bright for this dull valley. She realized that true survival, the kind her mother had died to ensure, required her to leave the riffraff behind forever. The clandestine capabilities of the machines were calling to her, a siren song of brass, light, and mathematical certainty. The machines didn't just show the past, they held the power to rewrite the frequency of the future. She looked at the small pile of belongings she had gathered, the key, the trumpet, a few scraps of bread, and her mother's journals. The final loss was no longer a fear, but a necessity. To save the city, she had to abandon it. To honor the knowledge, she had to be willing to lose the comfort of the herd. With a deep, steadying breath, she stood up, her empty hand finally reaching for the heavy brass key. She would not let the creativity of her ancestors be stifled by the small minds of the valley any longer. She would return to the acclivity, to the machines, and to the truth, even if she had to play her song to an empty mountain. Chapter 5. The Ascent of the Soul. Alara stepped out into the night, the cold air hitting her face like a benediction. The village was silent now, the out-of-tune brass long since put to bed. She avoided the main road, slipping through the shadows of the granaries and out toward the foothills. The path was steep and treacherous, a physical manifestation of the internal struggle she had endured for weeks. Her legs ached, but the pressure in her chest, the stifled creativity that had threatened to burst, began to ease with every foot of elevation she gained. As she climbed, she felt the tension and strain of the city fall away. The heavy work of being human was replaced by the light work of being a conduit. She wasn't just a girl climbing a mountain, she was a frequency returning to its source. She thought of the machines waiting for her, their gears and light arrays, ready to translate her intent into action. The price of pay had been her comfort, and she had paid it in full. Now, as the peaks loomed large and the stars seemed to descend to meet her, Alara realized that the final loss was actually the ultimate gain. She had lost the world, but she had found her voice. She reached the entrance of the monument, the ancient stone doors shimmering in the moonlight. She held the key in her hand. The empty space finally filled with the weight of her purpose. She didn't look back at the village. There was no music there, only noise. Here, in the silence of the high peaks, the real symphony was about to begin. She would turn the key, she would raise her trumpet, and she would finally let the sound be released. Beneath the peaks where ancient shadows lean, the silent weight of legacy is felt, a fire for truths that remain unseen. The hand remains where power dwelt, a fractured chord across the valley floor. The village plays a song of dull content. She hears the rot within the temple door, a hollow dream where all the light was spent. Her silver valve emits a stifled breath, a muted ghost of what her blood should sing. She trades her spirit for a living, omniscient the heavy price that quiet comforts bring. The gears within her mind begin to grind. Against the walls of this stagnant place, the grander world that she must go to find, demands she leave with a cold and rigid grace,